What if I told you your soulmate was chosen by magic and you had no say in it? What if your entire life was just a warm up for meeting your fated mate? Today we're going to be talking about the mating bond in Romantasy, why people love it, why it's everywhere, but why it might also be kind of a problem. So if you've read any of these books, you probably know what I'm talking about, but in case you fully missed the mating bond trend, I'm gonna explain it to you now. So I just wanted to say, if you plan on reading any of these books, maybe come back to the video because I'm not gonna go deeply into them, but I am gonna be talking about the mating bond in them. And in some of these books, you only find out about them in like the second or third book. So this is kind of my spoiler warning for you. So what actually is a mating bond? That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So usually in the books I have read, a mating bond is a magically destined connection between two people. It's usually romantic and sexual, and it's framed as fate. So in most books, two characters meet, and usually one person immediately recognizes that there is just a bond between each other, and it's just like this irresistible, unbreakable, once in a lifetime love. So that's where it gets kind of confusing, because usually we don't even know what the mating bond really is, because it's supposed to be between soulmates. Like, I'm pretty sure that's where the word mate came from. But in some books, it actually sometimes turns out that one person doesn't love the other person. So how do we define the mating bond? So I think you can compare the mating bond to the one true love trope that's been around forever, I think. Like Disney princesses, fairy tales, they always have this happily ever after. And it's usually like the very first and last relationship in life. So the mating bond is like an intensified fantasy book version of that. I would say it's the same core idea. So you're only meant to be with this one person and one person only, but also with like weird magic, usually including sexual stuff. And it very much romanticizes the idea that love is fate and not effort. And it also kind of diminishes and often demonizes past relationships, because every other relationship was just like filler to get to this mating bond, magical fairy tale, one true love relationship. So I would say in a lot of instances in these books, you can very much compare the trope to the love at first sight trope, because in that case, usually they also see each other for the very first time, but instantly just know there's this connection. So in a lot of books, one person, usually the hot fae shadow daddy, recognizes their mate immediately because they can like feel it. So I would say it's basically love at first sight, but like rebranded. So one of the best examples and probably most popular mating bond books is Acotar. And in this book, the main character Feyre only finds out about the mating bond, I think in like maybe the second book. So she doesn't really learn about it until a little later. I would say we as readers kind of know. At least I knew. We all know literally the first time she sees Rhys, she's like, wow, that's the most beautiful man I've ever seen. But of course, I'm in love with this other guy, right? And immediately when I read that, I was like, okay, so you just find him very attractive. But then that's supposed to show us that she also kinda didn't know, but also kinda did know from the beginning. I don't know. I feel like it's just framed as very much instant and physical attraction, which kind of makes it seem like love is just based on looks and pretty much superficial. And personally, I think that love is something that grows slowly over time. And when you go with someone else through all kinds of life situations that might not be easy, but you still stick together and you just learn their values, humor, each other's flaws. And that's why you learn to love them, not because some magic just says like, oh, yeah, no, that's the one you gotta love. Like that's your mate. And I don't know, to me personally, I've just never really believed in love at first sight because, in my opinion, how do you love someone that you don't know? So I believe love is a journey, I guess. Um, and you just grow to love each other over time. But when you see a person for the first time and you just feel like a spark, I would say that's just that you find them very much attractive, which is totally okay. Like, I'm not saying that's wrong. I would just not call it love. Now, I do know that some readers interpret the mating bond less as fate and more as like a metaphor for very deep compatibility, while others also say that it is very much fate, but having this sense of destiny just helps to not feel any uncertainty and knowing that there's gonna be a strong relationship so you don't have to question it. And I get that it feels kind of comforting, especially if real life dating is like chaos. But I still think that it sets very much an unrealistic standard. I do believe that, for example, like I said in acotar, it's done all right. Because I do think, even though rhysand knew from the beginning that they are fated mates, um, he didn't tell Feyre and just let her decide on her own whether she wants to be with him or not. And their bond and later relationship still very much develops over time as Feyre gets to know him. And the bond is only revealed after they've already formed a connection. So having this bond doesn't mean that you immediately have to trust a person or love this person, but it still has to be earned. Okay, now to the next part, and I gotta be honest, I definitely have a few points here. So, one of the first issues I have with this trope is mostly that it reinforces the idea of the one, which can definitely be emotionally harmful or limiting. And, like I've already said before, it very much undermines other relationships that characters had before, especially, for example, in Akatar, it very much antagonizes the love interest before, even though the actual main love interest ends up also doing questionable things at times. But in that case, it's kind of excused, which actually brings me to the next point, and that's that the mating bond very much excuses aggressiveness and dangerous situations because the mates are often very much possessive when it comes to their one true love, but it's usually just excused because they were just overcome with all these feelings to fight these other men because they were looking at the female main character in a way. And that's why it's totally fine for their mate to usually hurt them or even kill them, but it's fine because it's just that their love is so strong because of the bond that they had to do this. So it just very much takes off the responsibility for them because they didn't want to do it. The bond forced them to do it. Then, of course, there's also just this lack of agency. So falling in love isn't a choice, it's just biological or magic in this case. And I feel like it kind of encourages readers, especially younger ones, to view love as like this all consuming, inevitable. If I don't find the one, then it's not real love. But how do you even know who is the one? And also, what if your mate, so basically your one true love, what if he treats you badly? So basically it could justify abuse because you should stay with this person because you're fated to be together. So one example where I thought it was just very confusing was Crave. I think I read all the books, but it's been a while, so I don't fully remember. But there's a love triangle, and the main character is a girl, and she falls in love with this guy, and they already talk about them being like mates and it's their thing. But then she actually falls in love with another guy who is his brother, and now suddenly he's her fated mate. And at that point, it didn't even feel like fate or like the one true love anymore because she literally already had two one true loves. Like at this point, it's not the one anymore. It's already the second. I don't know. And her feelings for the other guy are just immediately gone, which kind of sends a weird message to people about relationships. Okay, now to my next point, which I actually hadn't even thought about that much before I wanted to make this video. And then at some point, I just very much noticed that the mating bond trope is overwhelmingly heteronormative. So it's basically always a cis white man with a cis white woman, and they are magically destined to be together and have this all consuming, dramatic, fated love. And the only book series that has the mating bond trope but also has a queer side character I could think of was Akatar. I also haven't read every mating bond book, okay? So if you know more, let me know. But the only one I could think of was Akatar. But still, the mating bond is only framed through straight pairings. So Moore, for example, is attracted to women, but one of the male characters, I think it's Azrael, it's been a while since I read the books, is still like hinted to be her mate. So how does it even make sense? Because is the magic broken? Because how would the magic not know that she's not interested in men and give her a male mate? I don't know, that just made no sense to me. Maybe it's not fully stated that she only is attracted to women, so I'm not 100% sure on this, but if so, then it just makes no sense to me. Because I am pretty sure that the main character believes Moore is his mate. So why would he think that? If it's like a magical bond that just knows, would it not know that she's attracted to women? I don't know. I just thought about that while I was making the video and it just confused me. But like I said, have you ever seen a single instance of like two men or two women or anyone outside of the binary being mated? Because like I said, I cannot think of any, and I don't know, I just think that sends the message, even like unintentionally, it just sends the message that magical soulmates and the one only exists for straight people. And I just think that queer love stories deserve the same level of epic, faded romance, you know? Now, if you do know some like maybe newer or indie romantasy books that might be starting to explore this, but they are kind of harder to find, please give me any recommendations because I'd honestly love to hear about them. So please let me know because I haven't seen it yet and I would just love to read that. Okay, so now we're getting to the next point, which is why do mates always tend to be like such, first of all, romantic relationships? Because I would say, like I said, the word mate, I'm guessing it stems from the word soulmate. And I think there are more ways to have a soulmate other than a romantic relationship. So, like, have they never heard of platonic love? I don't know. Because, like, my best friend is my soulmate, but I'm not gonna date her. So that's one thing. But then also the other thing, why is it always so sexual? Because genuinely, I feel like the mating bond usually, like I said before, it's kind of an excuse for the men to be like very aggressive and justify that. And I feel like the same goes for the sexual part because at least in the books I have read, it's usually like they can't even contain themselves because they're so in love because of the bond. And I'm pretty sure literally in acotar they say no, because when you start feeling the bond at first, you're like horny all the time. Which just begs another question about representation, like I talked about before. So, can asexual people have a mating bond? Because it seems like a very big part is sleeping together. Now we're getting to, in my opinion, the most important part. Um, why is the mate always 1,000 years old? Because I genuinely feel like the whole faded mate is also just a cop out for the age gap. Because usually they always say that nothing matters, not even the age gap, because they are meant to be, because they are destined to be together and they can't control fate. So it's gotta be right. It's gotta make sense that this million-year-old grandpa needs to date this 17-year-old. Okay, so now that I've mostly just critiqued it, what do I actually think about the mating bond? Because clearly I've read a lot of books that have this trope. So, like I said before, I would say it can be done quite alright. So, in some books, it's a little bit more nuanced and the trope is explored in different ways and does acknowledge that it doesn't guarantee happiness. Because, for example, like I said in Akatar, there are also characters who believe they have found their fated mate but can't be with them because maybe the other person just doesn't want to be with them. So I guess that's good. And also, we know it's a fantasy book. So we clearly know it's not real. And I think it's okay to enjoy the trope but also still critique it. I think you just have to be able to differentiate between fictional, like, I guess, wish fulfillment and real life expectations. So, one book that I think does this kind of faded mate thing, but also not really, is Once Upon a Broken Heart. And I really like this series because the protagonist very much believes in faded love and all the fairy tale, magical type of love. But the story constantly challenges her beliefs because the book literally starts with the main character thinking she has already found her true love and she wants to marry him. But then it actually turns out that he might very much not be her true love. And it just shows how dangerous this like clinging to this fantasy could be. So I really like that in the book. So my final thoughts are, I think, just that, I don't know, in my opinion, love just grows through time and choices and just getting to know someone, and the mating bond just kind of feels like a shortcut. So it's kind of like the romance without the vulnerability of falling in love because you already know they're gonna end up together. So while I think the mating bond is just like the newest, latest version of One True Love or Love at First Sight, it can still be done kind of in a way that explores real emotional connection. I personally like to see characters choose each other despite everything. So that's the kind of book that I like to read where actually fate is tearing them apart from each other, but they still hold on, even though they're actually not meant to be. So after hearing me talk for a while, how about you? Do you like the whole fated mate, fate deciding your love, or do you prefer when it just comes from a choice? Have you read any books with like the mating bond, but you think they did it right? And like I said, please tell me if you've seen a queer mating bond in Romantasy, because I'd love to check that out. Or if you have any other more thoughts about this that I haven't talked about yet, please tell me as well, because I would love to hear from you. And thank you for being here.